Crete is beautiful in this image from space. This is the island of Kythera, which is going to be very important in this segment. Here's where we're going now, though, the island of Thera, and the fantastic buried city of Akrotiri here on the southern rim.
It's fitting that we Cretans should have our own version of Pompeii, although without the bodies, we had warning. Both cities were buried in spectacular volcanic eruptions. Thera dwarfed Vesuvius, however. It was the biggest eruption in the last 10,000 years. It was so loud that anybody within 50 miles had their eardrums busted. There's an argument over when it was. Geologists are dead certain it was sometime before 1600 BC. Archaeologists are just as dead certain it was sometime before 1500 BC, about 100 years later.
Here's a mural that was buried at Akrotiri. A beautiful, smiling woman approaches a deity or a priestess on a raised dais with an offering. Before this adored divine figure and behind her are two magical animals, a blue monkey also presenting an offering, and a winged griffin behind her.
The images in this building did not mean anything to me, and then I came across this.
Here's a scene from the famous Eleusinian mystery on some Greek pottery. Another woman rendering an offering. No magical creatures, though. Bummer. Here's another one about the same mystery with somebody pouring a libation. Here we see wings and something like a chariot that looks like a wheelchair, so the griffin has made something of a comeback. Now let's go back to the Akrotiri image to confirm. Very similar. Here's another image from the same building. How does the mystery start? Persephone is picking flowers on a beautiful day. Here we see saffron stamen. Her mother Demeter is nearby.
The Minoans trained blue monkeys to pick those stamen. They had them on leashes. I bet that was adorable. There were monkeys on an island off the coast of Naples, Italy, where they built one of their first colonies. They might have gotten them from there. The Roman Emperor Julian the Apostate tried to roll back Christianity and resurrect paganism. He considered the Eleusinian mystery the most Roman of all the mysteries. I suspect he had no idea how right he was. You've heard of Akrotiri, by the way. You just call it Atlantis. That's right. We built Atlantis.
Here's an image I got off the internet. Apparently it's ultimately from atlantismaps.com, but I couldn't find it there. Circles within circles. This is what the Greeks said it looked like. Now let's go back to the satellite view. Here's Akrotiri again to remind you. Right here is where the core of Atlantis probably was. It's called Nea Kamenni now, and it finally re-emerged 300 years ago. As you can see, round. And you can see a little barrier island popping up to the side. They could have had those. Put in some earthworks or walls and you've got another circle. Then there's the rim of the volcano, including Akrotiri. Even as a fragment of what it used to be, the island is still the very image of the fabled city.
Atlantis didn't sink beneath the sea. It was blown to smithereens and left behind a big hole. But the islands around it certainly were. They were mauled repeatedly by the tsunamis set off by the volcano as it ricocheted amongst them. It mauled northern Crete, too, over and over again. I'm not worried about this. Neither am I worried about the impossible ages the Greeks talked about. There's a lot from this age they didn't know about. They didn't know these people were literate. They didn't know we Cretans and our fellow Anatolians had civilized them. They never heard of a Hittite empire. They never heard of the Sea People. But they talk about a Doric invasion that, as far as I've been able to ascertain, never happened. After the Sea People catastrophe, there were major migrations, but everybody was doing that. Atlantis is supposed to be beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which by our reckoning means the Atlantic Ocean, which is how it got its name, kind of like the way the Indians got their names. Our pillars are split between southern Spain in the north and North Africa in the south, and they flank the entrance into the Mediterranean. But these are not the original Pillars of Hercules.
These are the original Pillars of Hercules. They even look exactly like pillars. To get your bearings, this is Kythera, this is Thera, and this is Crete.
The Greeks got the shape right. They actually got the location right. We were just reading them wrong. They even got the stones on the buildings right. Most of the rest they garbled, which shouldn't surprise. We know they garbled the Trojan War. The city fell to an earthquake, although that might have happened during a siege because there are remnants of arrows. This is Atlantis. Did you know Thera preserved a portrait of the city? It did indeed. Myths and mysteries are one thing, actual verbiage is another. In this case, I think I've actually caught the Minoan speaking something like Latin, and if you followed my series on the Festus disc, you know this probably isn't the first time I've done this.
Here's the renowned seated goddess from Çatalhöyük in south-central Turkey. This is where I think the Cretans were from, and therefore the Romans. Here's the goddess Sibyl, whom the Romans called Magna Mater Deorum Idea, the great Idaean mother of the gods. Here we've got two votive axes from the city of Argalochori on Minoan Crete. They say, Ida Mate. Is this the Mater Idea? This is the celebrated Argalochori axe. I just showed you a couple of smaller ones from the same village, but this one has a fancier font that recalls the fonts on the famous Festus disc. And here you see Idama.
Okay, what I'm about to cover is speculation and dot connecting, but it's not idle speculation, and it's not random dot connecting. For one thing, there's more than one Mount Ida. There are two of them. And the Romans didn't get their Sibyl from Crete's Mount Ida, they got her from the other one.
This is the Mount Ida on Crete. This is the Mount Ida in Turkey. Obviously, sailors passing along the shore could easily see her. Minoan sailors, for example. This is also known as Phrygian Ida, because it's the Ida of the Phrygians. You might have heard of the Phrygian cap, a symbol of freedom and liberty as recently as the French and American revolutions. They're also famous for the myth of Ganymede and Zeus. Zeus abducts Ganymede from Turkey's Mount Ida. Now, as it happens, Phrygian and Latin might actually be closely related. The following is from Sino-Platonic Papers, August 2013, The Expansion of the Indo-European Languages, and Indo-Europeanist Evolving Views. This paper is about the evolving views of the renowned linguist Eric Hamp. In 1989, and again in the period 2009 to 2012, Eric Hamp produced several hand-drawn Stammbäume to represent his understanding of the interrelationships of the various branches of Indo-European. Reduced here are the 1989 tree, and a composite of the 2009 to 2012 trees, which do not present any differences in branching, but do occasionally have somewhat different notes attached. These trees are interesting from at least two perspectives. First and foremost, they represent the mature views of an eminent Indo-Europeanist, one who is equally at home at the micro level and the macro level of the complicated picture of these interrelationships. Secondly, comparing the first and second trees, created almost a quarter of a century apart, gives insight into how he assessed the new data and the new arguments that appeared in this period. This is his 1989 Stammbäume. Here's the Phrygian, and here's the Italic language. He has them vaguely connected. He hasn't made up his mind. And here he is about a quarter of a century later. Phrygian and Italic are very closely connected. In fact, they are directly connected. So close they might actually be the same language, although more likely just mutually intelligible.
If you're a linguist who thinks the Italic speakers ultimately came from the steppes of Russia, you might be tempted to dismiss my case because this is where you would expect them to be about this time. But I would counsel you to resist that temptation because this actually plays into my hands. For one thing, there's the fact that both of us have a sacred Mount Ida dedicated to a mother goddess who looks an awful lot like a figurine discovered at Çatalhöyük. But there's also something strange about the Phrygian language. The Greeks were shocked to discover it had a lot of Greek words. So many, in fact, that they thought Greek and Phrygian might be related. Well, they might be, but a structural analysis of the two languages show that they are not. So these are not inherited cognates, and that can only mean somebody borrowed from somebody. I would say the Phrygians do not have Greek words. The Greeks have Phrygian words. Let me show you how that could have happened.
You have the Minoans and you have the Greeks. Now, as you might know, and certainly know if you saw my series on the Festus disc, the Minoans civilized the Greeks. And in the process, there's no doubt the Greeks borrowed a lot of Minoan words. Let's just make three of them up as examples. Say, crocodile, pterodactyl. By the way, the ptero in pterodactyl almost certainly is Minoan. And hammer time. Well, time moves on, and the Greeks forget borrowing these words from the Minoans, and in the meantime, Cretans are building Rome, and the Minoan language is evolving into Latin. So they come across these Phrygians, and they notice that their word for crocodile is, say, crocodile, and the word for pterodactyl is pterodactyl, and their word for hammertime is hammertine. And they think, aha, Phrygian is related to Greek. A logical assumption. But under this scenario, it's not related to Greek. Phrygian is related to Latin, because it's really related to Minoan. We know the Minoans were heavily invested in Troy, and Troy is near Phrygian Ida. The gods watched the Trojan War from the top of Mount Ida. We also know of at least one instance in which the Minoans gave a Cretan name to a local Anatolian location, the city of Miletus. But even I had trouble with this because I just cannot see a major Cretan migration into this part of the world. But the Phrygians do not have to be 100% ethnically Cretan, or even mostly. Their center of gravity was the Sakarya River, the third longest in Turkey, once again consistent with Minoan penetration. We're a sea people. If we can move around the Mediterranean, we can handle a river. In fact, we probably prefer to. And here's the city of Troy. The Phrygians were Trojan allies against the Mycenaean Greeks, which is fascinating since the Cretans were Mycenaean Greek allies against the Trojans. And here's Phrygian Ida. We might have united the surrounding river basin culturally. Remember, Phrygian Ida is right next to the Mediterranean where we could easily get to it. Maybe our economic activity attracted migrants, or maybe there are a bunch of isolated populations along the river and Minoan became the local lingua franca, eventually supplanting the local languages. That way we'd still be an ethnic minority. And by the way, it's not the Sakarya River, it's the Sak River. Aria, or Arius, is the Minoan word for river, hence Sakarya. How do I know about Aria? Walking through the Festus Disc, Part 2. Everything from this clip was me working through an idea originally floated by Andras Zeke in his Minoan language blog.
The shape here at the front of the two samples lines up with the same region of the shape on the Festus disc. That's lovely. Zeke came to the rescue again, and once again, we're looking at very old Aryan. He dug up this Hittite stem, Arsa, for to flow and river, which I've confirmed, and this Sanskrit stem, Arsha, which means noble lineage. And what is a lineage but a stream of family ties through time? It's also a term for the old scriptures themselves in Hinduism. Not too shabby. It's pronounced like a sh, but with the tongue a little further back in the mouth. Sha. So the actual Minoan word for flow or stream could have been Arya, a well-behaved row word in the old European tradition. The consonant could have been softened through a process called lenition, which makes a consonant more vowel-like or sonorous. It would have been spelled out Arya. So now, the IP table. Here's the Sanskrit sh and the Minoan ya, a strong family resemblance. Here's the Hittite sa. So once again, we're an old Indo-European language, probably sounding a lot like contemporary Iranian languages spoken at the time, on the way to becoming Latin. And I stress they were also metal people. We were the masters of bronze. And you need tin to make bronze. And right now, the best bet is we got our tin from Afghanistan. So we would have still been in very close contact with our brothers who migrated to Iran and parts east. So pull all this together, and we've nicely lined up a plausible migration of the word river from the ancient Hittite all the way to modern Spanish. Ardia, which is probably written like this in the Minoan syllabary. Then the funniness with the R sound is settled and we drop A. Then the Romans add a well-known Indo-European suffix, was, which they spell V-U-S, pronounced wus. There's no V in Latin. Then Riawus, which is probably always Riwus. Then after the empire fell, the vulgar Latin Ria, which actually took us back to the original Minoan. Then from there to Rio, like Rio Grande and Rio de Janeiro. Lovely. You don't need to suspend disbelief. No need for exotic new rules. You're looking at 5,000 years of history, so there's plenty of time for the sounds to migrate, and most of this is solidly documented.
This lenition is one of those idiosyncratic changes that happens to all languages, and is a marker we can use to track the language and daughter languages through time. You saw the way that worked in my treatment of the word for river. I think I can do the same thing with the rest of this name. The Latin and Greek name for the river is Sangarius, so we know the modern name has deep roots. It preserves the R sound as well as the lenition, so it marks it very nicely as a possible Minoan word. The Latin might clarify. Blood river. Although the Latin stem for blood is sanguine, it's song in some daughter languages, so we know it was simplified at least once, or maybe the name used to be longer, or maybe I'm wrong. I would also add, my treatment of the Festus disc, along with the very existence of a river name like this, in a context like this especially, all braid together very nicely like a rope. So we have two striking geologic features in Turkey. Both are associated with the Phrygians. Both are potentially named by the Minoans. We know the Minoans were naming places in this part of the world because we have the city of Miletus and Mount Ida. The Phrygians certainly did not name our Mount Ida. The geography looks good. Crete connects Rome and Phrygia by sea, so it's an excellent vector to spread the language. All of this is speculation, as I said before, but it's not trivial. And this is not something I could walk away from without comment in this series. And I could just see this turning into a big deal, and I didn't say anything about it beforehand. In one final act of historic hilarity, the Phrygians would go on to found their own kingdom.
Phrygia. Does it look familiar? They took over the old territory the Hittites lost, as you can see from the map of their old empire I talked about in part 2. They even resurrected the city of Hattusa.
The old capital of Hattusa was largely abandoned by the time the Sea People showed up to destroy it, and the Phrygians resurrected it. They would dominate Anatolia for almost 500 years, and their homeland would be called Phrygia for almost 3,000 years. That's not too shabby. King Midas was Phrygian, the man with the golden touch. So is the Gordian knot. If I'm right about the language, that means that between the Phrygians and the Hittites, my people still controlled the entirety of the old Hittite Empire all the way till about 750 BC. By that time, Rome was up and running. So let's go back to the gods of Rome and Crete.
Our goddesses usually have that vague little smile, and they always have their secrets. If you ask me, the further you go back with Roman art, the more blatantly Cretan the Romans look.
Now let's look at some real-life things people use that can tell us who they are and where they came from. Pottery. Everyone calls this pottery Mycenaean, which implies most if not all of it is from mainland Greeks. But the details say Cretans.
This is from a presentation by Dr. Andrea Vianello. Modern political structures and problems in the state of the research on social interaction during the Mediterranean Bronze Age. Here we see the locations of various Cretan artifacts. Locally made ceramics are important because that tells us these people are here to stay. Those are the unfilled rectangles. These are the original colonies. As you can see, we started small. Of the men who would later speak the various Italic languages, including Latin, we see the Cecil, the Oskins, the Picente, the celebrated Sabines. This is Latium proper, but it's just a metal sample. This is the only evidence you will ever see that we are the Etruscans, but this is southern Tuscany. We talked about this in the last segment regarding the caniculi, which diverted water to make the land ready for agriculture. In any event, we would have to come here first because the area could support a larger population. Latium itself needed a lot of physical reengineering, as you know. And here's Rome. I guarantee you we had our eye on that site for decades. Here's how I know it's us. Early Mycenaean pottery has been found at coastal sites in Apulia, Calabria, and Sicily, but is concentrated on the Aeolian Islands, Lipari, Filicudi, Paneria, and Salina, just north of the Straits of Messina, and the island of Vivara in the Bay of Naples. Clay analysis of the pottery from Vivara indicates an origin in the southern Peloponnese and Kythera. We've met Kythera already. Here it is, in the South Peloponnese. This is Cretan territory. The mainland Greeks were better positioned and more interested in Asia Minor, the Trojan War, for example. Later developments confirmed this is a Cretan enterprise, almost exclusively from what I know so far. One of the most important of the new trading ventures involved increased trade with Italy and other areas to the west. The introduction of the Aegean weight system into these new regions indicates the seriousness of the policy involving trade in this direction. Finds of metal objects in Crete and discoveries of Minoan pottery in Italy and Italian pottery in Crete demonstrate that Italian trade was an important component of Minoan foreign policy.
We started our big push into Italy because we had to. We were persona non grata back in the old country. Turns out we were the original cat in the hat, and a certain great power back in the day didn't think we were so adorable. We didn't get to clean up our mess. Unfair. Next segment, an even more amazing story than Atlantis. You might want to refresh your popcorn.